is kindly going to be delivered by Andrew Ogden-Swift and Robert Zomborszki from Automation. So yeah, I'll just kindly hand over to yourself, Andrew.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. So we're going to talk today about using digital technologies to reduce energy use. So we're going to start off with an introduction around the general topic and business drivers. Going to touch on a distillation column as an example, and then there are really two technologies that many sites can rapidly invest in to improve energy use quickly. One is monitoring, and the second is real-time optimization. So we're going to talk mainly about those. We're then going to talk briefly about justifying projects, a couple of case studies, a summary, and then Q&A. So who are we? So as you know, my name is Andrew Ogden-Swift. I've spent about 40 years working in digital systems and applications on manufacturing plants. Of that, 25 years have been in research and development, and I've worked mainly in oil refining and petrochem, and for a number of companies, mainly Honeywell. Robert?
Yeah, hello, nice to meet you. My name is Robert Zomborszki. I'm a solution architect at IT Vision, and I'm working for 16 years with time series data analytics and monitoring, and I'm for 9 years a solution architect for process industries, but I'm working mostly with, I started my career in oil and gas companies, in the Hungarian oil and gas companies, and I've worked with mostly oil and gas companies, but we are trying to reach other areas also. So we have customers in other areas also. Thank you.
And if you'd like a copy of the slides for your records, please drop me an email. You should see my email address at the top of this slide. And I believe there'll be a recording of the webinar on the InstMC YouTube instance. So there are two main drivers we're going to talk about. Clearly, there are others that are impacting process manufacturing, but I'm going to talk about power and energy cost variation and sustainable development goals. So on the left-hand side, you'll see some trends of UK electricity spot prices. And what you can see is both very, very large long-term variation, and some of these we'll all know are driven by conflicts in between Russia and Ukraine, and also in the also with Iran, between Iran and the US. But there are also short-term variations, and you can see these very well highlighted in these graphs. As I mentioned, the top is UK electricity spot prices, and the bottom is natural gas prices in pence per therm. And you can see variations, for example, in electricity prices of 5% across the month, but from the start of the month, the maximum of 12%, and that was in June of last year, and then in January even higher. From the start of the month, the maximum almost 30%, and similar sorts of variations on natural gas prices. The other key driver is sustainable manufacturing. The United Nations has a whole bunch of sustainable manufacturing goals, of which 4 are relevant to what we're talking about today. So affordable and clean energy, industry, innovation and infrastructure, responsible consumption and production, and climate action. So we've really got these two main drivers of cost variation and sustainability that are putting a lot of pressure on process manufacturing companies to improve the way they manage energy. An example we'll talk through is a distillation column. As we all know, there's lots of distillation in process manufacturing. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a typical 2-product distillation column where we've got we're controlling the stripping temperature by adjusting the reboil flow. And the goal is there to control the amount of light key in the bottom product. And what we're looking at is to adjust the reflux flow back into the column to optimize reboil energy cost versus yield of the higher value bottom product. And as we increase reflux, that increases separation. So you get, as you increase reflux, you get more liquid spilling down the trays, the temperature cools, that increases the reboil duty, and so you get more vapor coming up the column. And that increases fractionation on the trays or on the packing. And that at a fixed bottom light key concentration increases the yield of the higher value bottom product. But of course, it also increases the energy cost. So what you'll see is the bottom product will go up over time, the increase, but this is not linear. As you increase fractionation, you get an exponential approach to a maximum separation. And so what you get is this sort of curve in increase in bottom product and this sort of curve in reduction in top product. And these are the scales of these curves have been magnified to make it clear. And then a linear increase in reboiler cost or steam cost. And if you then turn that into economics, you get this sort of margin response versus reflux ratio. And as we change steam costs, so steam costs would relate to if it's being raised by natural gas, that would be in response to the natural gas costs. What you can see is, and these are just examples where the steam costs being changed, if I remember correctly, by roughly 20%. And you get the optimum shifts from this point to this point and changes by the optimum reflux ratio is about 14%. So if we think about the causes of the change in the optimum and how often they change, and again, this is probably true across most unit operations on a manufacturing site. The first one is obviously costs, product pricing, and then operating targets coming down from supply chain. Supply chain probably not too frequent, maybe daily or weekly, but depending on the nature of your source of energy, your costs of energy could be changing every hour or so and can be changing quite significantly. Equipment efficiency, usually it's a slow drift over weeks or months, but rapid degradation in equipment due to component failure can be way faster. Ambient conditions, typically those changes are twice a day. So when the sun goes up and comes up and goes down, particularly air coolers. Feedstock quality, that's typically a slow drift. But again, if your operating procedure for feedstock changes is not done well, that can be pretty rapid. And then operator actions, again, if the operator is well trained and careful, those can be they can be very small, but from time to time the operators make mistakes, and they can be, the changes are often frequent, and if they're done poorly, the consequence can be quite a large impact on the operation. So the key point is operating changes are significant and frequent, and if you want to reduce these and get quick savings, there's of course many things you can do. You can upgrade your equipment, improve the efficiency of heat exchangers or separation equipment. You can train your operators, but most sites have great digital infrastructure, so control systems and typically some form of data collection. And so low-hanging fruit is often doing better monitoring. So many sites have some form of monitoring, and there are now lots of systems and tools around to enable you to do better monitoring very quickly. And then the other one is real-time optimization, or RTO. So just a quick example, particularly on the RTO area, because many people are very familiar with monitoring. But if we look at real-time optimization, we'll talk more about this later in the presentation, but there's a new class of optimizer that Automation has introduced, referred to self-learning optimizer, doesn't require a model. And you can see two trials that have been completed, one on oil and gas production where 44% reduction in gas lift was achieved, and the time to achieve that was roughly a month. And then fractionators on a bioethanol plant in Europe, again, roughly 25% reduction in steam use. And again, that was achieved in roughly 1 month. So typically, if you ask someone in the optimization area what savings you'll get, they'll say 2 to 10%. But as you can see above, the savings can be quite a bit larger. Robert.
Thank you. Okay. So I wanted to talk to you about a low cost and low time to value optimization method. So we'll talk about monitoring and how does that work. So normally we have our process, we have the process measured, so we have measurement connected to it, and we turn these measurements into key operating parameters. These are the monitoring reports. This is what we call monitoring usually. Of course, this is a little bit longer range, wider range. It's not just control loop level, but plant, process, or company-wide, and the time frame can be hours, shift, days, and years, and can be remote. But the point is that these key operating parameters are monitored by the user who have to take an action. This action can be a lot of things: writing an email, opening a work order, calling a series of meetings. It doesn't matter. What is important that at the end they have to set up new set points and changing the process. So we can treat monitoring as an open loop optimization. I would like just to highlight that don't forget to close the loop by taking the action so that monitoring really works. Okay, and right now I would like to show you some options on monitoring that is widely used. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so the first one is inlet air filter replacement optimization. This is one of my favorites. Normally filters are replaced on calendar basis, but these are either too early or too late, and either we have lost performance or lost opportunity on this. But if we have a measurement, a delta P measurement, for example, on these filters, then we can optimize this. First, what we usually do is we create a prediction model for the delta P. What should be the delta P on that equipment based on the process conditions. We compare that with the measured value, usually subtracted, and this value is usually linear as the filter is degrading. This can be easily forecasted, and when this deviation or difference reaches the limit, that's the optimal point when we have to replace it. Since we can forecast it, we can notify the maintenance team in time, and we replace it not too early, not too late, so the efficiency of the plant is always high. This can reduce greenhouse gas emission by huge levels. And I would like to highlight that the same method can be applied for heat exchanger fouling and also, for example, catalyst degradation. The same method, same alerts can be used. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. We are talking today a lot about the distillation columns. What can we do in terms of monitoring there? Usually we monitor the key parameters, the key products, key parameters through laboratory measurements, but this is usually too rare or too late to have a good effect on control. So we suggest to develop soft sensors in this case. How we can do that? We can combine the laboratory and process data in one system together. Then we are building the models, we are calculating correlation offsets, evaluating these inputs, what are the good inputs, compare the models, assess the accuracy of these models. And when we are ready, we have a continuous quality monitor that where we can alert on deviation and use it for better control through the process. This can greatly reduce raw material usage and also energy usage. That is the topic of our presentation, so that can also help with that. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, and what happens if we cannot build soft sensors? It can happen. Probably we don't have enough measurements around the column, so we cannot create these complex models, or it just doesn't work. Then we can always go back to statistical process control. This works on simple laboratory values, and this is used for monitoring purity, drying, conversions, and so on. How we do that? So usually we gather lab data, historical lab data, and based on that we calculate the control limits. And after that we are monitoring the samples based on these control limits. But we are not just alerting on the limits, on the limit breaches, but also we are monitoring low probability events. So we are looking for patterns that have very low probability if the control is working and we are producing the same quality. What can be these events? So for example, here on the screen, the alert number 2, so the second red column, that is, for example, 2 out of 3 consecutive signals samples are out of the 2/3 of the control limit. That is a low probability event, so it shows that usually our control is going in one direction, or the samples are going in one direction, so we have to take action, and it alerts before we are reaching the limit. There are other rules like the number 3, that is the third red rectangle. There 9 consecutive points are on one side of the mean. This is also a low probability event, so we have to take action and make sure that we keep the thing in control. This method usually increases the control. It reduces the variability, so we can get closer to the limits, and that means we can reduce the energy usage by reducing the quality giveaway on our process. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and what can we do if we don't have a continuous process, but we have a batch process? In this case, what we usually suggest is to build reference profiles based on the golden batches. How this can be built or how this works. First, we have to identify the critical periods like changes, startups, or we have to identify the batches, the whole batches in the system. After that, the engineers have to go through this and select the golden ones, the best ones that we want to treat as examples. And based on these example batches, we are creating Six Sigma reference profiles. It sounds. What does that mean? Is practically we are going through a batch, and at every minute, for example, we are telling that at the 6th minute, the temperature has to be between this and this numbers. At the 7th minute, this and this numbers. This creates a tunnel that you can see on the screen also. For example, that is this blue shaded area. The green is the value. So we are creating a tunnel that we have to follow through the process to keep the golden batch. We can alert on it, see that when we are out of this golden reference profile. This greatly reduces the variations of the batches, and if we selected the good ones, that's the point. This can reduce energy cost, and of course it can reduce the off-spec production. That is the biggest waste in this case. Okay, and let's go to the last one, I think. and this is about managing long-term improvements. So in this case, what is on the screen, the topic was that one plant wanted to make an energy efficiency initiative. They wanted to reduce their energy consumption by 10%, but they had so many different grades, loads, operating mode that they couldn't tell what is the actual number that they want to reach. They just wanted to, we have to reduce this by 10%. So what has been done is that they created a prediction model that predicted the energy consumption based on these variables that they cannot control, what is the order, what they are producing, and they use this prediction model as the reference. And from that point, they could see that, okay, this is the reference, this is our measurement, and they could track it continuously. That is the top of the screen where we see this shaded area, that is the reference and the minus 10% of it, and the blue continuous line, that is their energy consumption. So we can see that how it is going out of this area to reach the 10%. Also, they created aggregations weekly. So before their weekly meeting on assessing the actions, discussing what they will do next, they could see that where are they compared to the target. And as you can see here, during 3 months, they could reach this 10% decrease in energy cost, and they also could keep it because they were monitoring and they were in long-term monitoring what is their energy consumption through the whole plant. Okay, I hope these were interesting examples on monitoring, and Andrew will continue.
As I mentioned earlier, better monitoring is one of the key low-hanging fruit to drive energy reduction. The other one I talked about is real-time continuous optimization. And here are a couple of quotes, one from McKinsey that kind of supports our statement that optimization can drive 2 to 10% in performance improvement, where they're saying 15% more throughput, 5% higher yield, and 10% lower energy use. And then the other one from Mordor Intelligence, the second of the two, point to this idea that energy and operating conditions are changing so quickly that manual optimization cannot handle it. Legacy control systems struggle to maintain the speed of correction without some sort of real-time optimization overlay. So when we think about optimization, we can think about really 3 types of optimization, of which I've separated the second one into 2 categories. The first is unconstrained, and what that means is that there are no limits that are hit in trying to achieve the most economic performance. This is actually, I mean, at least in the industries I've worked in, this is pretty rare. So I've come across a couple of examples. For example, trying to do feed split optimization between parallel heat exchangers often is unconstrained. And the solution needs there are to find the optimum as it moves around, and that's typically fairly slow, and then ensure reasonable control at that point. We then have situations where the optimization is fully constrained, and that means that if you've got 5 things you have available to adjust, or 5 manipulated variables, 5 flows, pressures, temperatures, that the optimizer can adjust, you have 5 things that are limiting you. And there are 2 subcategories here. One is you're always at the same constraints. And again, this is really uncommon. I think I've come across this once in my career. And this is really actually very simple. You can optimize this once, you can do it offline, because the optimum never changes. You just need to control at those optimal constraints, but it's pretty rare. The other one is where the constraints change over time. So those constraints could be qualities, they could be hydraulic limits, they could be things like high temperatures on fired equipment, or rundown temperatures, could be flooding or space velocity limitations. And the challenge there is to find the optimum, to find the limits that are limiting the optimum and control well at those limits. And then the third is by far the most common, where the optimum is not fully constrained. So if you have, say, 5 variables you can adjust, then you're only running at 3 or 4 constraints at any point in time. And again, the challenge there is to find and track the optimum and control well at the limiting constraints. Some questions people often ask is, why do we want to do this in real time and closed loop? And in the late 1980s and 1990s, many companies tried doing it open loop and having the operators enter the set points recommended by the optimizer. And what happened was the operators would either ignore the optimizer, or they'd only enter some of the recommended set points that they happened to like, and the optimum therefore was incorrect. So the vast majority of companies with experience in this area now do optimization in closed loop. The key takeaway from this slide and prior slides is real-time optimization is valuable in most situations, and we also enable it by effective control. And there are various commonly found types of legacy optimization solutions. So the first is model predictive control. This has been around since roughly the 1980s, and it uses a linear model of the plant determined from plant tests, or that's originally how it worked. And the model is then updated and used to predict the trajectory of the process to steady state, and that's then used in both an optimization step and a control step, where the optimization step determines the optimal steady state value, and the control step determines the next step towards that optimum. Over the last 10 or 20 years, there have been multiple enhancements in this area. You can now get products, for example, GDOT from Aspen Tech, that supports nonlinearity in steady state. You have multi-unit versions and site-wide versions also available. The second class is what's referred to as steady-state real-time optimization. These use nonlinear steady-state process models, similar to those used for process design. So things like, the sorts of HYSYS, Pro2, GPROMS type tools that are used for process design. Typically, these require the unit to be at steady state for the optimizer to be run. So there'll be a steady state check. You update the model to match the plant, and then you run the optimizer, check it's still a steady state, and output the optimal values to the adjusted controls. And as I mentioned at the bottom, the model's used for parameter estimation, for update, and for optimization. And then and that's been around again since the late 80s, early 90s. And then more recently, we've had what I've called AI-based solutions, where you train a neural network to represent the process, or you can use what's called supervised learning to train a neural network on optimizer policies, again versus a model. And the key thing for everyone to recognize is that all of these require some form of model to be developed of the process before you get started, before you can commission the optimizer. And that requires a lot of expertise, and it incurs a lot of cost. And this in reality has meant, although these solutions have been around for 3 or 4 decades, the application has been fairly limited because of the cost and expertise needed. So what's automation been up to? We've been, the person who started automation used to be the chief control engineer for BP, and he was frustrated by the key takeaways on the last slide, that the models created a lot of cost and expertise requirements. So he'd set about developing a model-free approach. So you don't require a model to get started. It comprises, as shown in this architecture drawing, you have your regulatory controls, and then each regulatory control, be it quality, pressure, flow, temperature, is adjusted by an agent, and those agents coordinate through a common optimization objective function, i.e. some calculation that defines how well the plant is running economically. And so what Auto tries to do, and we can clearly only visualize two variables being adjusted, two MVs, but on most processes there are more than that. And the OV, or the optimization variable, is this measure of economic performance. And so what you're doing is starting at this point, and the optimizer adjusts the two MVs, and then it analyzes the impact of that in real time on this economic performance variable and these dark blue values, which are constraints. And so it tries to learn over time the shape of this hill, and then tracks up the hill by making adjustments until it either reaches the maximum if it's not constrained, or runs into a vertex of constraints as shown on this diagram. And the agent's been built to be simple to configure and deploy. They're self-learning and autonomous, and they work together in closed loop through the optimization objective function and the statistical methods to then find. And then as the shape of this hill changes with feedstock quality or equipment efficiency, it'll then track it over time as it makes adjustments. It'll just see that the shape of this hill has changed. And this is an example of it being applied to a wind turbine, and you can see the optimizer, there's two variables, just searching. This is power generated by the wind turbine, and you can see the optimizer searching as it adjusts the pitch and the blade, the tip speed, until it reaches a maximum value, and then it basically tries to find a better operating point as equipment efficiency changes. And of course, these are all enabled by good regulatory controls and sequence and procedural controls. So in the case of regulatory controls, typically these are PID controls, which hold flows, temperatures, pressures, possibly qualities as close as possible to set point. So enabling set point changes and disturbance rejection. Also, using averaging level control, so allowing levels to move up and down within their high and low limits to absorb disturbances. And this is typically enabled by technology available within the control system. And the key thing is then the right use of cascades, etc., and making sure the controllers are well tuned. And if there are very regular sequences or procedures executed, again, it's ideal to try and automate these to minimize the variation in the execution of those procedures. And again, the technology for this is available within most control systems. Excuse me. And needs to ensure proper design of the sequence controls, the various phases, operations, unit procedures, master procedures, etc. So in terms of availability, regulatory controls, PID controls, and variants of it are available in all control systems. Similarly, procedural controls are pretty widely available. The big challenge in some industries here is the lack of actuators and sensors, so you may not be able to fully automate procedures. Model predictive control is available in some control systems, so Emerson and Honeywell both have controller resident model predictive control, but it's also available from many vendors. Most DCS vendors have model predictive controllers running on a server. There are specialist software vendors like Spiro and Ipcos, who also have model predictive controllers. So there's a lot of technology available out there, much of it available from control system vendors. I think the most common are the products available from AspenTech, Honeywell, and Yokogawa. Steady state RTO, this is available from a relatively small number of vendors. It's not been terribly widely applied, but the two most common are Romeo from Schneider Electric and GPROMs from Siemens. More recent, these artificial neural network based solutions, there's been a lot of small companies. The most common is a company called Immubit. None of these companies seem to have been terribly successful yet, and the challenge there is really building a good neural network representation of the plant. So, for example, Microsoft bought a company called Bonsai, I think in 2016, 2017, that used this sort of approach. They used a reinforcement learning to train a neural network, and they've actually withdrawn that product. So I'm sure there will be successes here. It's just not very widely used yet. Then Automation has developed this self-learning technology that doesn't require a model, and so it requires much less expertise. And as far as we know, we're the only provider of that. And then analytics for monitoring is available from multiple vendors. So in terms of time to value and cost for optimization, as I mentioned, so there's these three predominant class of solutions: steady state real-time optimization, model predictive control, and self-learning optimizers. As I mentioned, and then these enabling technologies, procedural control and regulatory controls. So both steady state RTO and model predictive control require a model, and that has both cost and project duration impact. So steady state RTO costs can often be pretty high. You're talking of hundreds of thousands of dollars, in some cases more than $1 million. And the time to value is mainly dominated by the time to create a model, and in some cases that can be more than a year. Model predictive control, usually a little bit easier. The models are normally determined by plant test, but even a small problem might cost you upwards of $100,000 and take 3 to 6 months to deliver. Bigger projects clearly will take longer and be more expensive. Self-learning optimizer doesn't require a model, and so the projects we've done to date, typically without really pushing it, we've got completed in a month from starting the project. So much lower. The time to value is much lower, maybe 3 to 4 weeks on a moderate size problem, and the cost is much lower in terms of the expertise needed and the time to build the optimizer. Robert, so we'd now talk about some more case studies.
Yes, thank you. So here is the case study part. So I wanted to talk about the case study that I worked on. Here, what was the case is that a plant had a furnace, and on that furnace they had a very strict NOx emission limit. So they could only emit a certain amount of NOx during a day. And what they learned, that they either operating that way that they are very far away from this limit, or they are close to the limit, but during the day they are changing the feed rate up and down just to match this target at the end. And due to these changes, constant changes in the feed rate mostly, they were not producing at the most optimal specific energy consumption point, but higher and lower. And due to the nonlinearity of the specific energy consumption function, the mix of these points were always higher than if they would have run on the optimal feed rate. So how did we help them? We created a forecast for the NOx during the day. And it worked that way that we tried to identify the individual parameters that have effect on the NOx, and we can forecast it. These were like O2 content in the flue gas, the load, the ambient temperature or coil temperature, and so on. And based on, we forecasted these variables, and we used a regression model to define the NOx and aggregated it daily. So the end result was that the operators, since the beginning of the day, could see a prediction what will be the daily NOx emission, the daily total NOx emission. What was the result of this is that they could see, they could set the optimal parameters at the beginning of the day. I don't know how they did it. So it is like this. It was their job. So they set the parameters that they will match it. And during the day, they could focus on this target and set the parameters in small steps. They were making only small changes. There were no wide swings in the parameters or in the loads. That the whole process resulted in a more stable run. This is, of course, also more safe, but a more stable run also resulted in reduced energy consumption. And that way we could help them with this simple monitoring example. Okay, thank you, Andrew.
So the next case study is I mentioned gas lift optimization earlier in the presentation. So this is a unconventional oil and gas production facility based in North America. So basically what you've got is oil in a rock structure that's been fractured, and you've got a riser that comes up and goes into a oil and gas separator. The oil goes off to a tank, the water goes to water treatment, and the gas goes to a compressor. And then some of that gas is recycled through the gas injection manifold, and there's one flow controller per riser, per well. And basically the gas is compressed and pumped down to the bottom of the riser to increase the gas, increase the oil and gas production. The rest of the gas is then transferred to a gas pipeline. And so we applied auto agents to 5 gas lift flow controllers to 5 wells over a period of of several weeks. There was a roughly 44% reduction in gas and gas flow round this circuit, so going round here and back to the compressor, therefore saving energy use. There was also a 40% reduction in variability. The production, even at the higher energy rate, was at maximum, so there was no change in production during the project. And the time to create that reduction was roughly 1 month. So from the start of doing the training, defining the project, doing the training, installing the software to getting it running was a month. And we're pretty confident we could complete another project like that much more quickly. The second project I wanted to talk about is a bioethanol plant. So you've got what is referred to as wine, which is a mixture of ethanol and water, which is coming from fermentation. And so that goes into what's called a beer column, and there's steam at the bottom, and basically out the bottom you get water, and the top product is then slightly purified ethanol and water, and so that goes into 2 other columns, and out the top you get 95% ethanol that goes to molecular sieves for further purification, and then this water plus small amounts of ethanol coming out the bottom. So again, we installed this adjusting the steam flows and over the period of the initial period of the project, there was 25% reduction in steam use, and again the time from getting the go-ahead from the customer to understanding the operation, designing the optimizer, installing the software, training everyone, and getting it working was roughly a month. And again, we think if we had another project like this, we'd get that done in less than that time. So how do you get started? So in any case, when you're trying to understand these types of technology, the first thing is to understand the operation constraints and the performance being measured, and then set about and analyzing the performance. And again, you saw a tool that Robert mentioned, the Seek platform, that's extremely effective at doing these types of analyses. And from that analysis, you can quantify the improvements that are likely. As a rule of thumb, as I mentioned, you can expect roughly 2 to 10% economic performance improvement. As you've seen in the examples, you often do better than that. Then looking at, what's needed. Do you need any more instrumentation or existing instrumentation to be improved? Do you need any improvements to control systems? Then there are, of course, costs to the software and services to install, although the service costs, because again, there's no model, that these are pretty low, relatively speaking, and then go through and scope the project. So that's typically how you get started. So in summary, ensuring cost-effective operation of a process unit is difficult. There's very rapid variation in costs, and this is probably getting worse, in particular energy costs. And of course, there are other changes that are happening: equipment efficiency, feedstock changes, ambient changes, etc. Economic performance can be improved by all sorts of means, but two that can be done really quickly and pretty cheaply are improving monitoring. So using tools like Seek to, with the right services from companies like IT Vision, to enhance the monitoring and do more effective data analytics. And the second one that I've talked about is real-time optimization. And our belief is that this novel self-learning approach to real-time optimization radically reduces costs and project time, and that makes solutions that before this was available had mainly been restricted to very large bulk industries like oil refining and ethylene, is now much more widely applicable. And again, if you want to get more information, please contact myself or contact Robert, and whose email address was earlier in the slides. So I think that's the last slide. So if anyone has any questions, we'll be glad to try and answer them.